The following story takes place between the years 490 and 1206. In the year 430, the White Huns, or Hephthalites, took control of the northern part of the Sassanid Empire. Over the following years, they expanded and started to piss off the Guptas, which got them into a few minor scuffles. But it wasn't until the year 490 that the Huns managed to penetrate deep into India. Soon afterwards, the Vakataka Empire, a key ally of the ruling Gupta clan, was toppled and replaced by the kingdoms of Kalachuri and Chalukya, and that was the last nail in the coffin for these promoters of Buddhism.
Buddha, we may have a problem.
This put an end to the unity between clans which had brought so much prosperity over the years, and instead caused India to become fragmented into small fiefdoms of warring castes, more concerned with their petty local affairs than a grand national vision. Trade and commerce dried up and most societies gradually returned to agriculture, in what many consider a sort of feudal period in the history of India. Interestingly, this coincided in time with a similar situation in Europe during the Middle Ages. This went on for a long time, and although several empires rose and fell during that period, none of them managed to regain the splendor achieved by the Guptas. Well, at least until the 16th century, when the fearsome Mongol army arrived.
They destroyed my home.
Around the year 600, the Guptas held control over the historical city of Magadha, while other western tribes, the Maukari and Pushyabhuti, formed an alliance and created the Empire of Harsha, named after its first king, Harsha, who ruled from Kanauj in the province of Uttar Pradesh. Under him, India managed to regain some of its former Gupta prosperity, but it wouldn't last for very long, just about half a century. Still, the guy somehow found time for plenty of writing, including several theatre plays. Right around that time, the Hindu Brahmins reinstated the caste system among rebel estates, and so this priestly class became the head honchos. They commissioned the construction of grand temples to honor Vishnu and other Hindu gods. The religion became increasingly strict and closed, since spiritual leaders took a very dim view of jumping on a boat destined for Indonesia or even Europe. I mean, if merely being in the presence of an untouchable was so bad that they had to cleanse and purify themselves, you can imagine what they thought of mixing with foreigners who were outside the caste system altogether. Ugh!
That's disgusting.
Around the year 590, in the southern part of the Indian subcontinent, the kingdom of Pandya managed to regain its independence after having been dominated by the Kalabra dynasty for a long time. Good for them. However, the ones who expanded the most were the Chalukyas, even rivaling the Harsha for hegemony over the region of the Deccan. The Chalukyan king who led this empire to glory was Pulakeshin II. Under his rule, they expanded throughout the modern states of Maharashtra, Karnataka and part of Gujarat, where they had violent clashes with the Gurjar dynasty. By around 630, they controlled practically all of the central and southern Hindustan. In addition to the art of cutting off heads, they were also very good at sculpture and architecture, as well as devout worshippers of Shiva, the god of destruction, to whom they dedicated temples like the one at Lad Khan, or the complex of monuments at Pattadakal, comprised by 3 main Dravidian temples made out of red sandstone and which are nowadays protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. This was when the Shikhara, those famous bell-shaped towers typical of the northern regions, first appeared. Over in the south they also started building towers, but these were pyramid-shaped, the so-called Vimanas. Not to be confused with Vimana, which can also be a kind of flying chariot often favored by the coolest deities in Hindu mythology. At this time, India began to receive waves of Zoroastrian immigrants who came to be known as the Parsis. These poor devils were fleeing for their lives from the Sassanid Persian Empire, pushed by the arrival of new groups of Arab peoples who professed the new Muslim religion and who were forcing everyone to choose between converting to Islam or being converted into a corpse.
I don't have much of a choice.
That was when the outer edges of the Umayyad Caliphate came up against India. Meanwhile, the Chalukya Empire was starting to have some competition. The small Tamil kingdom of Pallava. After successfully defending their independence, their king, Narasimhavarman I, went on the offensive and managed to secure their autonomy in the southeast. By the year 650, all of these multiple conflicts had worn down everyone involved and ended up diluting the former powerful empires into an amalgam of weak, petty kingdoms. Without a doubt, the main beneficiaries of all this confusion were the Pallava, who managed to take the Chalukyan capital, Vatapi, in modern-day Badami, and then liked and subscribed to the channel, just like you should do. As we explained, all of this late classical or early medieval period was marked by small and independent feudal estates fighting against each other, especially in the north. This lasted until the arrival of Islam, which took everything and everyone by storm. Unfortunately, this meant that precious few records remain about most of these kingdoms. For its part, the south had always been very fragmented. This was partially because of its mountainous terrain, which prevented the creation of large kingdoms based on agriculture. Nevertheless, this period did see the rise of empires of a decent size in that area, like the Pallavas, who gradually assimilated several aspects of the Aryan culture of their northern neighbours, particularly the high classes. They began to dedicate less time to shepherding and instead took to conquering lands. The interesting part here is that nobody really knows who these Pallava really were. Some believe they were Parthian immigrants, but it's not at all clear. The only certain thing is that they set up a hereditary monarchy whose leader claimed to be a descendant of the creator god Brahma.
Yeah, whatever.
With the rise of Hinduism, Jains and Buddhists slowly lost their influence throughout the territory in favor of the Brahmins. In fact, this victory of Hinduism over the other religions was commemorated by Narasimhavarman I in the bas relief of the descent of the Ganges, or Arjuna's penance, narrated in the epic poem Mahabharata, which we talked about in the first episode of this series. You should check it out. That work is part of the group of monuments at Mamallapuram or Mahabalipuram temples, which also include the complex of Pancharathas, the temple of Thirukadal Malai, and the shore temple, built by Narasimhavarman II around the year 700, and which can be found, as its name indicates, on the shores of the Bay of Bengal.
It's easy to remember and it doesn't invite a lot of questions.
Then, right around that time, the Chalukyas rose in power once again and pushed back the Pallavas to regain their lost territory. And now let's return to the unstable north for a while, which was witnessing the birth of a new kingdom founded by the Kanauj dynasty. It started off very strong and conquered plenty of territories right out of the gate. However, this only lasted until the arrival of the Kashmiris, who then took it all over. But one kingdom which did manage to gain its independence was Nepal, whose king Gunakamadeva founded the capital of Kathmandu in 723 and restored the ancient temple of Pashupatinath. Another group of people who became important at this time were the Rajputs, a clan of fierce warriors from Sindh, nowadays known as Rajasthan. They are believed to be descendants of the Huns whom we started this video talking about and who had settled in that area. Meanwhile, a clan of Guptas who had somehow managed to remain unconquered reclaimed part of their old kingdom from the Kashmiris and founded the new Pala Empire in 750. Their first leader was Gopala, and then his successor, Dharmapala, continued to expand their domains. Around that same year 750, the Chalukya finally went down the drain and were replaced by the Rashtrakuta dynasty, who continued the worship of Shiva. These lot left us the Ellora cave complex, very close to Ajanta, which combined Hinduist and Buddhist art and includes the famous temple of Kailasha, erected by King Krishna I and intended to serve as Shiva's abode. Here we can see a transition from the cave temples that were more common in Buddhism to the construction of freestanding buildings. However, this particular temple wasn't built by stacking up bricks, but instead by chipping away at the rock of the mountain where it is ensconced. That explains why it took almost a century to complete. Around that time, a very important philosopher named Adi Shankara was born. He created a movement that sought to distill Vedic philosophy by eliminating the most confusing and complicated aspects, including strange rituals, making it simpler. This doctrine, known as Advaita Vedanta, maintains that the myriads of Hindu gods are really just different manifestations of a single one, Brahma, who we humble humans are unable to perceive clearly because we have a distorted sense of reality. For Shankara, meditation was the only path that enabled us to pierce through to the true reality. Talking about cults, the Tamils from lower classes also began to worship a series of devotional saints, and this was the origin of the Bhakti movement. Its big deal was proving piety by making offerings, singing hymns and that kind of thing. And it seems that it may have begun as a form of resistance against the Aryanization process that was going on in the region at the time.
Freedom, love, and peace.
In the northwest, while the Pala and Rashtrakuta were scrapping over the scraps of Kanauj like hungry dogs, the dynasty of Gurjara or Pratihara took the opportunity to expand their domains. But this turned out to be far more dangerous than they had anticipated, because they came up against the Umayyad Caliphate, which had been advancing relentlessly throughout Persia, conquering everyone they met, and at this time were slowly making their way across the Indus River. Seeing this giant advancing, the Gurjar initially soiled themselves, as anyone would, but it appears that the first contact with the Abbasids, Saffarids of Sistan and Samanids was rather cordial. However, the year 1000 brought with it the Ghaznavids, a group of Turkic Afghan tribes led by Mahmud of Ghazni, who became notorious for specializing in reducing Hinduist temples to ashes. One particular northern kingdom of this period was controlled by the Chandelas of Jejakabukti. Their capital was at Khajuraho, where they built over 20 temples. There may have been even more, but those are the ones that have made it to our days. Their main claim to fame is that they are covered in reliefs depicting the Kama Sutra, with plenty of detailed sexual scenes and positions, and even some zoophilic images. Up until this time, the Chola had remained as a relatively small kingdom in southern India by wisely staying out of trouble. But around 840 they hit their stride, and by the year 900 they had taken over Pandya, led by their king Parantaka I. The Chalukya, who had sought to reclaim their power at the end of this century, were no match for the Chola, who by the year 1000 controlled almost the entire eastern seaboard of the peninsula, all the way up to Bengal. This happened during the reigns of Rajaraja I and his son Rajendra I, who turned the Chola into a powerful maritime and trading empire, with boats that crossed the Indian Ocean on their way to China and other nations in Southeast Asia. Their main commercial rival was the kingdom of Srivijaya from the island of Sumatra, which dominated part of what today are Indonesia and Malaysia. These two kings constructed the temple of Brihadesvara or Raja Rajesvaram in honor of Shiva, including a 70-meter-tall Vimana. The temple was located at their capital of Tanjore, which became one of the main political and cultural hubs during these chaotic times. Between the reigns of Kulothunga I and Rajaraja II, the kingdom of Chola experienced a golden period, but then subsequent rulers made a mess of things and gradually lost more and more territory. For example, the Hoysala dynasty created a small fief in the state of Karnataka around the year 1100. There they built temples with a star-shaped floor plan in the style of Vesara. One example is the temple of Kedareshwara. Another Tamil temple worth mentioning is the temple of Sri Ranganathaswamy, dedicated to Vishnu and which nowadays is the largest active Hindu temple. The place is full of gopurams, or pyramidal gate towers, decorated with thousands of painted reliefs and statues, although a large part of what we can see nowadays was added later, since it was destroyed and rebuilt several times.
It's factory paint, same as original.
The Jains were another group who left us wonderful architecture. In the north, we have the complex of Dilwara in Mount Abu in Rajasthan, while in the south, we have the complex of Shravana-Belgola in the state of Karnataka. There, they also built the huge granite Gomateshwara statue of a holy figure named Bahubali. Now let's return to the action. At this point, some estates like the Kalachuri and Yadava, which up to then had been tributaries of the Chalukya, rebelled and formed their own kingdoms. The former wouldn't last very long, while the latter did manage to gain control over the Deccan for a while, until the Turks arrived. And that's because at this time, the north of India was gradually being invaded by Arabs and Turks. Around the year 1100, the Sena dynasty of Bengal fought against the Pala, seeking to take over their lands, even though they were both Buddhists and their cultures were practically identical.
Why must they always fight?
This culture maintained its influence over wide areas of Southeast Asia, like Java and Cambodia, where they built spectacular mountain temples. And of course, in Cambodia, occupied by the Khmer Empire in the midst of the Golden Age, they raised the super famous Hindu temple of Angkor Wat, dedicated to Vishnu. As you can see, the chaotic north became crowded with minor regional states that came and went. The situation didn't look like it was going to improve, and indeed it didn't, because these peoples made the big mistake of not uniting to combat the looming Muslim threat that had been growing for several centuries.
I'm scared.
Around the year 1150, the Ghaznavids fell and their place was taken by the Ghurid Empire. These Persian Afghans, led by Muhammad of Ghor, destroyed the Rajput of Sindh and took Pataliputra from the ailing kingdom of Pala. With this, we reach the year 1206, when Muhammad of Ghor died, just after placing as governor of the city of Delhi his former slave and later general Qutb-ud-Din Aybak, who no sooner found himself in power than he declared independence from the Ghurids, founding the Mamluk or slave dynasty and the Delhi Sultanate, the first in India. This point is generally considered to be the end of the classical period and start of the Middle Ages in India. And the rest is history. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave us a big like. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.